And that is how you do a conference. I think we can safely say Sony won E3 again this year. They didn't have the gigantic bombshells of before, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Shenmue 3, all that kind of thing. But what we did see, we're actually going to be able to play within the next couple years. Now, Sony had a lot of games shown. They had very, very little people in suits saying boring things, corporate words about innovation and showing us charts and talking about games. It was all about the games. So let's get into it. Sony had a very confusing schedule lineup where we couldn't really figure out when the actual show started. They made it sound like 8 o'clock was going to be the beginning show and you were going to be missing some things. That was a bit of a dupe and got you into watching the pre-show. However, it seemed like the broadcasters themselves knew they were going to lose them, so they promised that there were going to be some exclusive videos and release dates. That amounted to a few things, some VR stuff. Knack 2 is going to be out September 5th. I mean, this game was a big disappointment before. They wanted to make an accessible family game, a platformer to show off what the PS4 could do. Didn't really knock anyone's socks off in terms of a launch game, but having a second go around and focusing on the cooperative aspects with this drop in and drop out platforming action, it could be fine. And they're pricing it very aggressively. It's only going to be $29.99 US dollars. This guy sitting over here that he keeps calling Assad, he is pretty stoked about all of those prices. They have this new thing called PlayLink. Now, what they're going to do is, this is very similar to Jackbox Party Pack, where it's going to be multiplayer games, but they're designed to be played with people who actually don't really play games. They don't need to know how to work a controller. They just need to know how to work a cell phone, and that is most people in the world. Suck it, Antarctica. So this game here, Hidden Agenda, this is made by the same team that made Until Dawn. You can see from these visuals, it's got that same very photorealistic animation style, facial expressions. It's going to be a gritty crime thriller where you're working with and against the people on your couch using their app on a phone, and you're using the controller, and you're trying to work together and against to find out who the killer is, that kind of thing, making big choices in the game about who lives and who dies, multiple branching storylines. But they're using the strength of having a phone app is that you can have a lot of hidden information. Someone looking at their phone doesn't have to show you what's on it. So it's going to turn into sort of a game of who do you trust in your friend group, that kind of thing. Sounds like a great way to lose some friends. Then they showed us more of a Nintendo-esque charming collection of, charming piece of the collection called That's You. We have Shuhei Yoshida messing around with some people on a couch. Very Jackbox Party Pack. Again, this is great. I think it's nice for Sony to sort of cater to that non-hardcore group of gamers. Games that you can play with your grandmother. A game that I'm pretty excited about is Matterfall. This looks actually pretty good. This is from the makers of Resogun. It's a side-scrolling sci-fi platformer. Tons and tons of particle effects and explosions going all over the place. It's, we have a lot of these games on the Steam Marketplace. It's a pretty popular style to take a shot at in terms of, for the indies. But it looks pretty good. There's a lot going on. I mean, Resogun and the other one that they'd made there, they come from a pretty strong pedigree, so this looks like it has a pretty good chance of succeeding. And the one I'm a lot more excited about is Everybody's Golf, formerly known as Hot Shots Golf. That's going to be coming out August 29th for just $40. Matterfall is going to be coming out August 15th in 2017. So they changed the name from Hot Shots to Everybody's Golf. That's what they call it in Japan. They're adding a few things like mini games. There's going to be fishing mini games, golf cart racing. There's also going to be a 9-hole course that has access to a lot of people playing online, so you can run into friends and strangers. It seems like like 90% of the games at the conference this year have been introducing online aspects. That is definitely the way that the industry is going. A big game for Sony from Polyphony Digital's Gran Turismo Sport. This is going to be coming out fall 2017. They showed a little tour of their studio, their 200 staff that they say is irreplaceable. They have a room set up for 20-player online racing. They're pretty serious about it. They wanted to go back to the mechanics of it. It takes a long time in between Gran Turismo games, and many people were thinking maybe the racing genre had passed them by, maybe even lapped them, so to say. But it looks like they're going to come out swinging. We'll see what they can do. Then they showed a bit about Sony virtual reality R&D, research and development. They talked about some kind of crazy things about possible in the future controlling games with your brain, and how that's not quite something they can do yet, but they're leaning in that direction. So look forward to Sony linking up with your brain and hopefully not needing to download an update. Super hot PSVR is going to be coming summer 2017. Superhot is a great game. It's a few years old now, and Superhot VR is already out, so it's nice to see that they're going to have another title for PSVR. Tons of PSVR games. Spark is coming in 2017. This is a VR sport. It looks like a mix of tennis, racquetball, ping pong, air hockey, tennis, a bunch of things, and it looks fine. It looks great. I think the big challenge of VR is, of course, what do you do with your feet? Do you move around? Do you control the joystick? This is a game that just has people standing on a platform, so that makes a lot of sense in a way. And I guess you're going to be playing that online competitively. Tropco 6, that was another one they said was a long-running franchise. They didn't really show anything of this other than just a big, fat, long cinematic. I know the series has great music. It has usually a lot of traditional Cuban or South American Latin music. They say new developers continue it, but they didn't show any gameplay, so there's not really much to talk about there. I'm assuming it'll be almost exactly the same. Undertale was the next one. Undertale came out in 2015, hit some other spots in 2016, so it's finally going to be coming out on the PS4 and the Vita with a collector's edition that comes with a musical locket, and that's very pretty. Undertale's a great game. If you haven't played it, you've got to play it. If you have any sort of nostalgia for 90s JRPGs, or just like a game that wants to make fun of video gaming in general, but do it in a clever way. It's not just all jokes. There's a lot of depth behind all that flash. Ni no Kuni 2 is going to be coming out November 10th, 2017. Looks just as good as the last one. The beautiful animation, the Miyazaki style. It'll be just fine. So then the actual real show started up, which they called the Media Showcase. And they showed the usual sizzle reel at the beginning. Sony had a beautiful stage. They opened up with another live performance, similar to the God of War performance they had done before. This built to quite an epic, rousing finale. Sony really uses the venue and the stage to their advantage. They played with lighting and altered it dynamically depending on the presentation. They had objects hanging that we're going to see later on, some really freaky objects hanging. They took advantage of these two other screens that were moving in and out and adding to the whole presentation. They have how to do an E3 conference down to an exact science, and a lot of other companies could learn from them. The first game that they showed was the standalone expansion to Uncharted 4. Let's find that here. So this was actually going to be just DLC for Uncharted 4, but Naughty Dog couldn't help themselves, and they ended up making a standalone game. So I'm assuming it's going to be about 8 to 10 hours long. Looks fantastic. Looks great. Will people take to the new characters as much as they did Nathan Drake? I enjoy the secondary character who started off as an antagonist in Uncharted 4, and I'd like to see her get fleshed out. She didn't get too many lines in this. It seems like they're banking on the white girl to be filling Nathan's shoes, and she does have some of that same sort of personality as him, more like the older, sort of in the older games, the younger Drake. Then we had Horizon Zero Dawn and the Frozen Wilds, another DLC, and that actually looked pretty spectacular. Yes, people running away from gigantic monsters. They didn't really show too much detail what is actually going to happen here. Just maybe it's a little bit darker. It'll be a new area to explore. This is a really fantastic looking game. It was great to see Guerrilla Games get to do something other than Killzone. So they moved on to, oh, by the way, that is coming out in 2017. They moved on to Days Gone. This is sort of a Last of Us, post-apocalyptic, except you're a biker. There's zombies. A lot of stealth gameplay, a lot of brutal melee. They have a nice little scene later on where they encounter some zombies, hides from them, moves on, and blows up a gate so that these zombies end up attacking these baddies. So a lot of environmental effects you're going to be playing around with. Those type of mechanics, I mean, it's an action RPG. If the story holds up and the mechanics stay tight, it looks like the production on at least the cinematics is done really well, and the integration with the real-time gameplay seems fine. I think it could be pretty strong. I wasn't so hot on it when I first saw it. I just think it's like more zombies. Do we need more zombie games and another Last of Us type game? But a little more space away from that, and it looks like this is shaping up to have a bit more of a personality of its own. And then, of course, every game out in the wild needs to have a scene with a gigantic bear.
Nice and slow. Don't make a sound.
covered in barbed wire and a stick. That's cool. People like that one. Now we had some really big announcements. By the way, there have been no other presentations other than this guy just coming out now. He doesn't say much. He just says it's great. He says they threw a couple things at him as a surprise. Wasn't prepared for it. That's great. So, Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter, I think Wild World is called, or Monster Hunter World is going to be coming out in 2018. This is a gigantic franchise, really popular on 3DS, big in Japan, and it's finally making its way to PS4. Monster Hunter World, it's called. And then the biggest announcement came out right after this one. If you were wondering what was going to be the big nostalgic remake that Sony would count on to make a big splash, here it is. From the PS2, Shadow of the Colossus. This is going to be out in 2018. Very seminal game, very important game. A landmark game, deserves a spot in the Video Game Hall of Fame. Very simple, but very big. Very sad, without having hardly any words spoken, at least none from the main character. Coming out in 2018. Then we had kind of a strange trailer for Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, which is a fighting game. But they showed story the whole time. Not particularly well done story. It's fine. The novelty of seeing a bunch of these different Marvel and Capcom characters jammed together wears off after a while, though it's nice seeing Chun-Li hanging out with Captain America. But the reason they focused so heavily on the story demo and showed zero fighting gameplay is that the story demo is out now. You can try it out. How about that? But really, what this game needs to succeed, especially in the competitive fighting scene, is they need to see the actual fighting. They need to see if this is going to hold up and if people are going to be latching onto it and building that big community that it needs to survive. But speaking of a game that doesn't have a problem with a big community, you got Call of Duty World War II coming out November 3rd, 2017. By the way, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is coming out on September 19th, 2017, and they still didn't show any of the actual gameplay, just a mediocre trailer from the story. So, World War II, November 3rd, 2017, going back to the well. I think it's about time that they went back to this. They've had enough time dicking around in space and in the future, and people enjoyed it for what it was, but now they can have a fresh take on new hardware, new visuals, and take a look at World War II in a way we haven't seen it before. Seems great, the usual Call of Duty, nice and gritty, big set pieces. It's sometimes hard with these ones to see what is actual gameplay and what is pre-rendered, and it's so easy for them to cheese these trailers with a bunch of bull shots, as you would call them. Then we had Skyrim in VR. We saw this in the Bethesda conference. It'll be interesting to see if people take to this. I mean, Skyrim has a gigantic following, but do people want to sit with a headset on for the 50, 60, 100 hours that it takes to play Skyrim? I don't know about that. This was the big VR section. We had another one called Star Child. This is a very colorful sci-fi side-scroller, a little bit ambient, mostly just platforming, and then this main character encounters some gigantic creatures, and one of the gigantic creatures puts its hand down and saves her, King Kong style. That's really all they showed. It looked like it had a nice style to it, but we're going to need to see more before we know what that game is all about. Another PSVR game. These games are coming hot and heavy. And not just another VR game, but another creepy psychological horror VR game. They kept this pretty mysterious as well, which is probably the best way to go with these horror games, but the visuals look good. A lot of wandering around darkened medical areas, maybe a lot of hiding, a lot of stealth, perhaps. Who knows? Then we had a sort of a generic shooter, another VR game called PSVR. Looks like it's going to be a cover shooter with a lot of machine gunning. That's about all they showed. This game must be kind of far off. They didn't have a release date, and they didn't show much else than one area standing up and machine guns. Again, it'll be interesting to see where that settles in for VR, where it seems to be the kind of games you can make with it. Right now, they're taking very traditional games, and they're just shoehorning it into VR, but it is different to keep that immersion of being involved in it when you're not walking around. Some people use teleporting around. Some people just let them use the joystick, but we shall see. Usually VR games are all first person, but this next one, Moss, is about a little cute little mouse, and it is actually third person. It's not something you would normally see in VR. It's like a colorful animal mascot type game, exploring the woods, exploring tombs, fighting giant animals, and hack and slashing your way through. This is not It's a very different look. I'm sure that they'll probably have it in regular gameplay as well, not just VR, unless you're using the VR to control the perspective, maybe for some puzzles. But they have such a wide range of camera angles. Pretty interesting why they would put it there. But again, this is still sort of the wild world of what they're doing with VR. This is the second generation of it, or the second wave, as they call it. Now for something a bit more traditional. This was a huge announcement at one of the PSX, but here is a little bit more of God of War coming out early 2018. They focused a lot on the relationship between Kratos and his son. He's trying to protect his son, and we see a scene where he throws away his axe, but eventually gets drawn back into the fighting, killing some creatures, and a giant snake pops up near the end. He tells the kid, "Don't worry." The kid says he's not worried, and the kid can talk to the snake. He can understand what it's saying. And they get together, and I guess this kid is like a Slytherin from Harry Potter because he can talk to snakes. Next up, we have Detroit Become Human. It's a very, very long trailer. Now, this is the same developer that brought us Indigo Prophecy, or Fahrenheit if you're in Europe, and Heavy Rain. So they're masters at blending real-time game mechanics with a very cinematic presentation. The story is going to be about some of the AI starting an AI revolution to save the other androids from human oppression. They focused a lot on stealth and infiltration, sort of a heist style, disabling security, attacking security drones, that kind of thing. I get the feeling the way they paint this main character, although he seems like the good guy, the protagonist in this trailer, so there's something sinister about the way he's talking and the way they frame him. So I think that they might switch him around. And previously, in other Detroit Become Human trailers, we've seen a female character who was a lot more sympathetic. I mean, she was pleading for her life to be saved from being dismantled as she sort of gained consciousness. And that seems to be what they're doing with these other AIs. They're waking them up and they're starting this big army. Really excited for this. I loved Indigo Prophecy and Heavy Rain. They're great games, very, very unique. And don't be scared by Beyond Two Souls for these type of games. I think that this one could be very, very, very strong. Another game that is not going to need a lot of help selling is Destiny 2. It's going to be coming out September 6th, 2017. Focused on a bald, mean-sounding antagonist, and then they showed the Destiny team coming in. They said that there are a few PS4 exclusive options if you buy Destiny 2 on the PS4. You got an exclusive strike called Land of Shadows, an exclusive ship called the City Apex, an exotic weapon called the Borealis, and an exclusive PvP map called Retribution. Now, this was probably the piece de resistance for the night. This is the final trailer. We are ripping through these, and it was a big, long, fat look at Spider-Man. Now, this looks fantastic. This is I'm really glad that we're getting, that especially Insomniac is getting a chance at coming out with a Spider-Man game. It's a nice blend of, say, Arkham City combat, the Batman Rocksteady style combat with that timing-based encounters that really works well for a superhero fighting game, especially with Spider-Man because he's so agile. A lot of stealth actions, sort of Metal Gear Solid-ish. And then we're going to see some set pieces later on, some gigantic set pieces, cranes falling over, helicopters holding onto these giant 1-ton weighing things smashing into buildings, and while Spider-Man's desperately trying to catch up to it, and then sort of quick time event sequences along the way with snap and quip. So it's very much Uncharted, epic scope and scale and personality mixed with that Batman Rocksteady Arkham Knight style gameplay, and it looks like it couldn't have been made for a more perfect and suitable superhero than Spider-Man. I'm really glad Insomniac's doing it. I've never really played an Infamous game. I'm sure that there's a ton of Infamous influences in this as well. So that was a very, very lengthy trailer. The ending was a little bit odd. Then they showed a sizzle reel and then just said it's over, and they put a camera on some people getting up slowly. It was very anticlimactic. That was it. Sony had very, very little talking. They just showed the goods. They didn't have the gigantic bombshells they've had before, but I think that every other company should learn how to do a conference, give people what they want. Don't have your head up your own ass. Don't be too self-important about it. Don't talk. Don't put people up on stage that shouldn't be on stage, aren't comfortable with being on stage. Just give people a great show. Sony did it again. Unless Nintendo knocks it out of the park somehow, then I would assume Sony won this. But thanks everybody for watching. We're going to have a Nintendo breakdown tomorrow. We're going to be having Misha joining us on the show. She's a Nintendo expert. She's going to be doing the write-up for the 90skid.com website, where we have write-ups for all of these conferences and the latest news and reviews and all that crap as well. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of E3.